There was a time when USA fought against its natives. 1815, Battle of New Orleans. I always wanted to know, how did the natives actually go extinct? What happened to them, you know? We don't really much talk about the natives of America in this channel. We have talked about Civil War, we have talked about Cold War, Second World War, but not the native wars. Kings and Generals is one of the best channels ever to do research, to study history. I love that channel, and today we're going to watch what happened in the 1815 Battle of New Orleans. I know that much, that it is war with natives, two sides, Native Americans versus US settlers.
While British historians often view the War of 1812 as just one theatre of the larger Napoleonic Wars, it stands alone as a conflict in both American and Canadian history. Its most famous battle, the Battle of New Orleans, was also its last, and featured one of the most important American military leaders, Andrew Jackson, who led an outnumbered and undisciplined ragtag force against the world's strongest military.
Wait, I'm wrong. It's not about the Native Americans, it's about Napoleonic Wars. Did I miss that much? Damn! Alright, well, I guess we're watching the video about Napoleonic Wars now.
At war with Napoleonic France for a long time, Britain started pressing American merchant sailors into service, forcing them to join the Royal Navy. The burgeoning United States considered this illegal and threatened to retaliate, but as Britain needed these sailors to reinforce a blockade of France, the practice continued.
Wait, so by this time U.S.A. 1776 was the time of independence, it's 1815, so U.S. is free, this is the French colony, this is the Spain colony, and this is still the British colony, and this is unoccupied territory. Till now we still have a tiny U.S. U.S. compared to what it is now was just like a quarter of its size. And already a considerable country when Britain wanted its services and everything.
Both that and the blockade of France had a negative effect on the American economy. Meanwhile, as the Americans expanded westward, they faced Native American nations who fought back to defend their land.
Wait, so the Americans expanded westwards, meaning the French colony, they just took it over, just like that. It's not like, no pretense, no like, oh, you crossed our border, you killed our citizens, nothing like that. It's just, we want to expand, we're going to take your colony, French people, right? But as we can see here are the natives, so maybe it is about the natives. I don't know. This is how I educated myself about US history. Estonians don't know anything about US history. I guess, as you have said, we know more than Americans know about their own history, but still, compared to what we know about Europe, it's nothing, so I'm educating myself now.
British became allies to these Native American nations, seeing them as a buffer to its Canadian colonies, and provided them with weapons. As attacks on American settlers on the frontier increased, more and more of them began to blame Britain. American warhawks proclaimed the need for the new country to defend its national honor. On June 4, 1812, Congress declared war on Britain, and despite the fact many New England representatives strongly opposed the war, on June 18th, President Madison signed the declaration.
Wait, so US declared war on Britain? So that's the second war on Britain, basically. The first one was the War of Independence, basically the American Revolution. And the second one is this one. I don't think they had any wars with Britain after that, because then the First World War came in 100 years already. They didn't have time to have any more wars, I guess.
Britain was caught off guard by this, as their forces in Canada were not prepared, and the country was mostly preoccupied with the war in France. Luckily for the British, the American forces were not prepared either. In 1812, the United States had an army of less than 12,000 soldiers.
What? Less than 12,000 soldiers. In 1812, America's army was as big as Estonia's army is right now. Yeah, we were at the same levels. But in 1812, Estonia was unfortunately part of Tsarist Russia. Napoleon never got to us. He almost got to us, but he never got to us. And in 4 years, slavery would be banned in Estonia, 1816. But it's 1812 right now, so 4 more years of slavery.
Congress had approved the expansion of the army up to 35,000. Service was voluntary, the pay was little, the army had few experienced officers, and many did not want to join because they didn't support the war. Still, they were the first to attack, assuming Canada would go down without much of a fight. Michigan's territorial governor, William Hull, led American forces into Canada, but mostly fought with words rather than artillery, threatening the locals with a proclamation that stated that they must surrender or the horrors and calamities of war will stalk before you. However, on August 16th, British and native forces led by Isaac Brock and Chief Tecumseh of the Shawnee Confederation attacked Hull's forces at Detroit.
What? The natives were allies with British. It's so weird. Like, the natives don't know which side to pick. It's their land. European powers are fighting in the land that was theirs like 200 years ago, not that long ago. And now they have to pick one side. Both sides are evil. They just have to pick one and fight the other. Doesn't really matter which one they pick, because they will lose anyway. Britain and America are obviously using them. Like in this case, Britain was using the native powers. I'm not praising the natives. Of course, they did horrible things also to the Americans and to the British and to everyone.
Forcing him to surrender without firing a shot. The War of 1812 took place in 3 theatres: the Great Lakes region, along the east coast, and in the south. The Americans found little success in all 3 theatres. In the Great Lakes region, after Hull's embarrassing defeat, his replacement, William Henry Harrison, struggled to defend the few frontier outposts constantly under threat from both Native American and British forces. On the northeastern border with Canada, American General Henry Dearborn struggled to prepare an attack on Montreal due to the New England militias not wanting to fight in the war. Whenever American forces did cross the border, they were often pushed back. Dearborn was replaced with Generals James Wilkinson and Wade Hampton, but their complicated invasion plan of Montreal completely fell apart in November 1813. Out west though, American luck had begun to change, as General Oliver Hazard Perry was able to capture Lake Erie in the Battle of Put-in Bay.
So basically this is the time in America's history when they still were at the very start. They did not have strong army or motivation. They did not have a strong self of identity yet. And they're already fighting wars. U.S.A.'s history is just war upon war upon war. If somebody knows, how much peacetime has U.S. had since 1776? How many years? I read it somewhere. There was really a small amount of years only. It's just war upon war upon war. That's why I say it's a military system, although it doesn't show. If you go to U.S., it's a civilian world, right? But no, actually it is a military system. Not a bad thing. Hey, don't take this as criticism. I'm just opening your eyes that if you think it's a civilian system, no. The system is based on military. The whole country has had war more than peace, which is fine.
On September 10th, 1813. This paved the way for General Harrison to take back control of Detroit, defeating Major General Henry Proctor and his British and Native American forces at the Battle of the Thames on October 5th, 1813. Tecumseh was killed during the battle, and it completely demoralized his Shawnee Confederation. In the south, influenced by the...
Oh yeah, I heard that Tecumseh was trying to form a confederation of natives. He was like this new age Native American. Before that, natives did not have the same thought process as Europeans. Land was not owned by anyone. Personal property was not a thing in Native America. But Tecumseh had a different idea. He was trying to make like a European-like state or confederation out of native tribes to unify against European nations. He was too late. If he would have done it earlier, they could have protected themselves against anyone, I think. They had enough men, but he was too late. He was truly a very new thinker, very unique amongst native thought process.
Distance of Tecumseh and his confederation, Native American forces continued to build up, uniting to fight the American forces. The main conflict became known as the Creek War, led by a traditionalist faction of the Creek Nation, known as the Red Sticks. Ultimately, American forces led by General Andrew Jackson defeated the Red Sticks at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in present-day Alabama on March 27, 1814. This ended the Creek War. Meanwhile, along the east coast, the British Royal...
See, there's not even names here yet. There's names: Indiana, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina. We know all of these names nowadays, but this part, the French colony, the ex-French colony, doesn't even have names yet, because it's such a new thing. It's all war, it's natives, settlers. There's not many people here. I think all of this we see today started from here. It's really cool to see.
Royal Navy was dominating. Throughout the war, they had set up a blockade from Maine all the way down to Georgia. In April 1814, after Napoleon went into exile, Britain was able to focus more on defeating the Americans, sending thousands more troops to North America. British forces led by Major General Robert Ross took over Chesapeake Bay and took the US capital, Washington, on August 24, 1814. Ooh. Famously...
Is that the very first time Washington was taken as the capital? The first and last time, because in the Civil War the South didn't take Washington. They almost took it, they never took it, but here Britain took it. I think it's the first and last time.
Burning government buildings like the Capitol and the President's home to the ground.
Ooh.
As Americans fled the capital, troops gathered at nearby Fort McHenry to attempt to defend against any further British advances. During the Battle of Baltimore in September 1814, American forces held back both sea and land invasions by the British, killing Major General Ross in the process.
Oh.
This resistance eventually inspired Francis Scott Key to create a poem which later became the lyrics for the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem of the United States.
Really? That's where the lyrics came. Ah! But it has the words, the rockets in air and the bombs burst in air. It has the word rockets, right? I think in it. Back then there weren't any rockets. And I always figured, where did it come from? But it's the war with Britain where it came from.
By this time, peace negotiations were already underway in the city of Ghent in modern-day Belgium. On Christmas Eve 1814, a deal was struck to end the war. However, the news of that would not reach America until a few weeks later, and British forces were well on their way to the city of New Orleans, a strategically important port city located where the Mississippi River meets.
So, peace, it was made 3 weeks ago, but since the travel took so much time over the Atlantic, 3 weeks would it take, and the British forces would have taken more cities by that time. Such a weird thing. I didn't think about the travel times. Again, the Second World War, like 100 years later already, you could send information quite instantly almost. You had the telegraph. But now you still had to wait 3 weeks.
It's the Gulf of Mexico. Capturing it would have allowed them to take over the Louisiana Territory. Britain had sent 60 ships, with approximately 14,450 soldiers and sailors aboard, all under the command of Admiral Sir Alex Cochrane. On the other side was Andrew Jackson, who by this time had become one of the most successful, if not the most successful, American leaders of the war. When he had first arrived to New Orleans, he found the city completely defenseless. He immediately declared martial law and collected civilians to garrison the outskirts of the city. The army he built was mostly made up of untrained militiamen and volunteers. It was a ragtag bunch.
Every time I watch a video about US war before the First World War, Civil War, Revolution, or this war with Britain, both sides, basically they're settlers or civilians who go to war and take up guns and arms and just defend their homes, basically. That makes you understand so much better why the gun laws and the private property stuff and the meme, get off my property, you know why that is so popular in America. Because this is America. That's their history, you know. Now I see where it comes from.
Bunch, which included free blacks, New Orleans aristocrats, and members of the native Choctaw Nation. His troops were so diverse that orders had to be given in English, French, Spanish, and Choctaw.
Oh yeah, we're forgetting that this was not one identified America yet. It was for settlers from different countries still who spoke different languages. Because the Declaration of Independence was only like 2 generations ago, maybe one generation ago, 1.5. So the languages, like French had not yet become American, the Germans had not yet become American, so all of these different nations actually came together to form this militia.
The night before the peace treaty was signed, Jackson led his 2,131 men in a surprise attack on the British camp 9 miles south of New Orleans.
Ooh, bold move, Jackson.
The completely unwitting British troops managed to fight off Jackson's forces, but 46 of their soldiers were killed, with 167 wounded and 64 missing. Jackson's attack had shocked them. They expected a quick victory with their superior, experienced forces.
Jackson attacks with minor forces, untrained forces at night. Surprisingly, everything I like about it. Yes, I love these tactics. In the Civil War, you have heard me bitching about the tactics of brute force, direct attack. Jackson does the thing as I want to do the thing. Surprise attack in the night with a minor force, hit and run basically. Shock tactics.
But everything looked more complicated now. The British responded with a sortie on December 28th and an artillery bombardment on New Year's Day. Both failed due to successful American counterfire. By the early days of January, reinforcements had arrived for both sides, with the British soldiers now over 8,000 strong and Jackson's troops numbering 4,732.
Still outnumbered 2-1. Jackson has 2-1 less men, but knowing how he thinks now, I think he has a chance.
Jackson's men built up fortifications near the Rodriguez Canal, which branched off the Mississippi River and was about 5 miles south of New Orleans. Jackson used slaves to widen the canal into a defensive trench, and used the extra dirt to build a 7-foot-tall rampart.
We cannot forget the slave part. In these wars, only whites were fighting. Because in the Civil War, it took half a war for the North to accept blacks as soldiers. So in this war, definitely only whites are fighting, and slaves are only for the workforce. Quite horrible, yes, very bad. This is like a very raw America. It's such an interesting thing. These people are not Americans. They're French, German, British settlers, and then we have slaves from Africa who have not yet become American. Some of them even speak their native languages still, I think. We have very different cultures mixed together, and in 100 years they all would be American, I'm pretty sure, not French, Canadian or African anymore.
Supported by timber. This barrier, nicknamed Line Jackson, stretched from the Mississippi to the marsh, which was next to impossible to get through. Jackson told his soldiers, "Here we shall plant our stakes, and not abandon them until we drive these redcoat rascals into the river or the swamp." Despite the imposing fortifications, the confident British Lieutenant General Edward Pakenham planned a 2-part frontal attack. The first
frontal attack, yes, do it, go to your deaths. Frontal attack is a dirty word, it will get everybody killed.
Part involved a small British force crossing the west bank of the Mississippi and taking over an American battery. After getting those guns, the plan was to turn them on the Americans, catching the defenders in a barrage of crossfire. The second part involved a force of 5,000 men charging forward in 2 columns to overwhelm the main American line at the Rodriguez Canal. His main force charged towards the canal near the swamp. They were met by shots from Jackson's 24 cannons. Along the riverbank, Colonel Robert Rehi advanced his forces, dominating an American redoubt. But before Rehi could claim victory, however, he was shot dead, and his men frantically retreated. Unluckily for the British, the fog quickly lifted, giving American gunners clear sight of the enemy forces. Cannon fire successfully split the British line in several places. Jackson's soldiers, many of them hunters of the frontier, fired with stunning precision. Pakenham, who was up front with his forces, was a victim.
Yeah, hunters of the frontier. Actually, if you think about it, hunters are really damn accurate. Their livelihood depends on it. And if they come to fight German hunters, French hunters, the settlers, they fire quite accurately. And if you are behind, it's same as Gettysburg. You are behind a defensive position and small numbers of compact units are charging at your way. You don't even have to be very accurate to hit them. So I know British are 2-1 right now, the numbers, but still, you need at least 5-1 to attack the position like that.
Victim of that accuracy. He was hit and died minutes later. The lead British commander on the battlefield was now gone as well. Meanwhile, the British force that was supposed to take over the American battery was delayed. They captured it and were modestly successful at taking out some American troops, but by that time it was too late. At Line Jackson, the British soldiers were retreating in huge numbers. The British attack on Jackson's fortification was a failure, and they had lost around 2,000 men, including 3 generals and 7 colonels.
7 colonels and 3 generals. That's irreplaceable. Unreplaceable? Not, how do you say? Not. It is not replaceable. It takes years of experience to do that. You just lose 3 men like that and 2,000 men. Some battles lose 20,000 men and still no generals, so this is a huge loss.
The whole battle lasted less than 30 minutes.
Oh,
Jackson's
a short one.
underdog unit lost less than 70 men.
70 against 2,000 losses. What the hell? I'm telling you, if you have a defensive position, direct attack towards it, it's not. You can't do that. Unless you have like 10 times more men, you can do it, but still you would be losing a lot. There's no point to it.
The British army remained in Louisiana for several days. After its naval force failed to take Fort St. Philip on January 18th, the British had to retreat back to the Gulf of Mexico. Soon, both sides had finally received the message that a peace treaty had already been signed. The Battle of New Orleans was the final major battle of the War of 1812, and is often considered the most important battle of the war, despite being fought after a peace treaty was negotiated.
Such a weird thing. There was peace and they still fought because they didn't know it was peace.
The battle was significant for the Americans, as they were huge underdogs in Louisiana and expected the worst. This victory raised the profile of Andrew Jackson, who was now a national hero. And while most historians conclude today that the War of 1812 was a stalemate, it felt like a victory to Americans after the victory at New Orleans.
It's so cool to see these American history videos when US wasn't still a one identified intact country. Even Civil War, US didn't have one identity, it had 2 identities, North and South. In this time of period, it had dozens of identities. German, Dutch, French, British, native. They were just farmers and settlers who haven't even learned the American language, some of them yet. So the American identity as such, as nowadays, didn't exist back then. Such an interesting period. I love it. I want to see more videos about that era. Please send them to me. If you're a patron, find some of them, send them to me. Please go and get the cup and become a patron also. Support the channel. And as always, until my next video, stay cool and bye bye.